In this video, I want to tell you about housing history and the VA home loan, specifically when you're doing a manual underwrite. And so, in this video, we're going to talk about what are the housing history requirements for doing a VA home loan with a manual underwrite. More importantly, why is this important? The reason it's important is the VA wants to make sure that you have a stable housing situation and that you aren't going to make payments on time. Because the last thing we want to do is approve you for the loan and then you can't make payments or whatever is going on. And so to make sure that things are stable with your housing. And luckily, it's not a super hard thing to get done, but there are some very specific requirements. There is some paperwork that the underwriter will request from you. And so in this video, we're going to talk a little about how that works and exceptions and all that kind of stuff. Let's get into it. First thing you need to know is that you need to have 2 years with no late housing payments. And that's if you rent. If you're a current homeowner, then it'll be 2 years with no late mortgage payments. The other nice thing is that this can actually be used to establish credit history. If you have a real light credit file, oftentimes you'll need a certain amount of payments established to have a credit history. And so this is what's considered an alternative trade line, which is excellent. If you are using it as an alternative trade line, keep in mind there will be a little bit of additional documentation required, typically canceled checks for the past year. So right now, for example, I'm working on one where they had a lot of stuff go late. And they only had 2 established trade lines because they had closed everything. And so we were able to use that rental history as an alternative trade line to reestablish credit. So that was definitely something to consider as well. You might think this is a weird question, but what is the actual definition of late? Is it day it's due? Is it the day that your landlord puts a late fee on it? Or is it a different day? It turns out there is a standard for this, and the actual standard is 30 days late, which of course is typically well past when the landlord's going to put a late fee on it. So if you're less than 30 days late, so maybe you're only 5 days late or 6 days late, and you still had a late fee, that would actually not, that would actually still fulfill this requirement. That would not preclude you from getting the VA home loan, which is really good. But if you're past 30 days late and you probably got an eviction coming, definitely that's a problem. And we will certainly see that, and you would unfortunately have to wait to get that VA home loan. Now, let's also talk a little about a housing history letter. On how complex your housing situation is, we might ask for a housing history letter. If we do, it's not a big deal. It's really more to confirm what's on the application. Think of it like your resume. What you do is just write us a letter and says, from this date to this date, I was at this location. Here's what I paid. If you're only in 1 or 2 locations, typically we'll just use what's on the application. But if you have a more complex housing situation over the past 2 years, we'll most likely ask for a housing history letter, and that way we can tie everything together to make sure that we have the correct info in the file. And so, like I said, it's really kind of like a resume. From this date to this date, I was at this place, paying this much. From this date to this day, I was in this place, I was paying this much, etc. What about no rent due situations? So, for example, if you're active duty, oftentimes there's no rent due there. If you're using BAH or if you're staying on a friend's couch, those are all totally allowed. We just need to confirm those dates and confirm the story. And certainly that's totally allowable. Believe it or not, homelessness is also allowed. If you have a period and things happen where maybe you were homeless, that's actually totally allowed on the VA home loan. That does not cause automatic denial. Again, we just need to document it. The other one that I've seen are collections due to broken leases or damaged deposits, those types of things. Those are interesting because they would not fall under this category. Now, if you have a collection due to a broken lease, most lenders have a no collections for a year rule. So even though the VA doesn't really have that rule, pretty much every lender has that. So if you have a broken lease situation and you don't have extenuating circumstance like job loss, then most likely you would fall into that 1 year rule, but that's better than the 2 year rule. That's your typical standard rule on rental payment history. So I had one where they had gotten evicted. They had moved because of a medical condition. And when they left the apartment, it was not in idle condition. And the landlord not only hit him for a broken lease, they also hit him for damage deposits. Those were totally allowed because it was about 14 months ago. So even though the lender had that 1 year rule, it did not hit that 2 year mark for a rental situation. So how do we verify this? We have a few different ways to verify it, and it really depends on one, your access to different things, and how much you want to give us, and also just how much we are doing on our end. But there's different ways to verify. Hotels and Airbnb is pretty simple. Receipts are good. They always give you some sort of email receipt and a credit card statement, and you can tie those together. And so typically, what will happen is that Airbnb will send you a receipt, and you say, from this date to this date, I'll stay at Airbnb. I paid this much money. Here's my credit card statement from that date showing that it came from my account, like this type of thing. That's totally fine. The next is verification rent or verification mortgage. That is where we will talk to your landlord or your mortgage company and get a statement saying that you had no late payments. That's one of the simpler ways to do it. It requires a lot less work on your part. But the downside of that is if you have not given notice yet and you're not sure when you're leaving, then obviously that would tip them off if we're getting a verification of rent from them. Next way we can do it is cancel checks. If you have canceled checks for during that period we're asking for, that's another way to confirm it, or money orders as well. If you're paying with money order, that's fine. Now, there is a certain clause called extenuating circumstance. Extenuating circumstance is if the period during that collection you actually did go late, but you can show that you were either laid off due to job loss, or there was a strike or some sort of situation where you didn't get enough hours, or if there was a situation where a medical condition prevented you from working, maybe a cancer or something like that, heart attack, hospitalization, like those types of conditions that are a one-time thing where it was a 3 to 6 month period where you couldn't work, but that's since been resolved. There is something called extenuating circumstances where some of these rules can get waived. Now, I have a whole video about extenuating circumstances that goes into this whole thing in a lot more detail. And so that video is linked below. So if you want to know more about extenuating circumstance claims, be sure to watch that video. So that's a little bit about housing history and the VA home loan. Now, if you have any questions about VA home loans, feel free to give me a call. My number is 937-572-3713 or scarpro.com. Talk to you soon. Bye.